probably have got a shift of people, but the last hour we said that those people whose square dancing areas were predominantly mainstream should probably be over there discussing what they're doing with the mainstream program, and that this idea of the 25-week combined program was addressing the problems in those areas which are predominantly plus. Am I correct in assuming that?
That's a valid assumption. It's not necessarily correct, but it's valid.
Okay. But I mean, so if what we're trying to do is address those areas which are predominantly plus, I'm sorry, Kip, but what does your proposal change? If people are going from 0 all the way through plus anyway, what difference does it make if you shift these here and these here? The new dancer still has to go from here to here to dance in his community. So, sorry.
Should I answer that? I'll come down there. You want to take the mic? I'll come down and answer that if you'd like. Basically, the suggestion is aimed in the direction of what I see happening around the country. That in spite of the fact that the mainstream community has its list, and they keep it rather pure, the mainstream community also has its radical enthusiasts who are out there teaching their mainstream dancers to load the boat. And they're teaching them a teacup chain. I have called 6 festivals this year that precisely hired me to call mainstream. In 3 different states, I called 6 festivals as a mainstream caller. Not one of those festivals did I attend and call at where they didn't ask me to do some kind of plus. And I even reminded them that it wasn't in my agreement. And they said, yeah, but we do have the plus dancers here, and we do have this, and we do have that. I'm saying that the real world is that if you did that shift, then we can begin to take each one of those 2 modules, Program A and Program B, mainstream and plus, and then we can pare them down. And then we can begin to talk about doing something within a 25-session period. But if we can't agree to the content, how can we possibly address the question of how long it's going to take us to teach it?
Glenn Rahoff from Seattle, Washington, and I like your idea, Kip, and I see that we have a real problem and a real us and them situation, and that's difficult. My concern is coming from an area that's predominantly mainstream in the Seattle area, is that if we were to do that and call this new list, which included 8 plus calls, mainstream, and then went back and took everything else and threw it onto a thing we call plus, some real turmoil, not only for the mainstream dancers in our area, because we've got to go back now and collectively pick up all of those dancers who do not probably know those moves. They may have learned them as quarterly selections once upon a time. On the other side, those of us who call plus in the Seattle area and have strictly plus clubs and have well-defined and keep those plus and mainstream, we'd have to do the opposite. We would have to maybe convince them that some of those moves, I guess you could say, well, if they're plus dancers, they ought to be able to dance everything on the mainstream list. But the confusion that's going to be caused between the mainstream community and the plus community, at least in our area, I see that as a problem, although I do see that as a way to bring the 2 worlds of differences back together to some sort of semblance. I still have some problems in that, and that I speak for the callers in my area, and that's why I'm here. I have some problems with what we've worked so hard in Seattle to maintain for so many years, and I've only been there 2, but there's been guys that have called up there for 35 years and called only mainstream and keep it mainstream. I hate to destroy that for them, because they worked very hard to do that, and at the same time I hate to destroy it for the dancers. Sherry Haig was asking me, she didn't believe me that I have a club that's danced for 25 years, and those people, of the 45 couples in it, 50% of them have danced for 25 years and dance only mainstream, and that's all they want to do. And you even talk to them about plus, and they say, no way. That probably is the exception in the country, not the rule. And I'll give you that. But my concern is that to go back and pick up the dancers who are mainstream and now say, we're going to teach you 8 more moves now, and we're going to change the mainstream list. It's going to cause some confusion, at least.
If it was only 2 new moves or 3 new moves, would that be easier to do?
I don't know. We have some hard time selling them even on quarterly selections to get them to do that. And we do. Of course, we change those quite frequently. If we knew that was going to be changed for from now and ever, amen, and that was going to be it, that, yeah, I think maybe we could probably sell that to them and say, we're going to bring these back. These, like, let's say, for example, coordinate and those moves at one and track 2. We're going to bring those back. They were mainstream quarterly selections. We decided we didn't want them on the mainstream list. We moved them to plus. Now maybe we're thinking, because the majority of the country dances those, that we're going to bring those back. And I think they'd buy that. I really do.
How about
I don't think they'd buy 8.
Oh, how about a 3-year phase-in program?
I think that would probably work too. If we dump 8 on them at one time, if we come out of here or if after Reno next year we dump 8 brand new calls and say this is the mainstream list, we're going to add 8 brand new calls, those of us who call mainstream are going to have a hell of a lot of catching up to do. In addition to teaching our regular mainstream classes, we've got to teach our mainstream dancers those other moves too. But I think that they would buy it as a phase-in.
Thank you. And I particularly appreciate the fact that we're not personalizing this discussion. I think that any idea on the table is wide open. If you want to take a pot shot at it, you go right ahead and fire. If you have some adjustments you'd like to make to it, make it. And I don't care if it's my idea or anybody else's. But I really appreciate, this is one of the first sessions, a few sessions that I've seen in CALLERLAB in a number of years where it didn't amount to a personal argument. Thanks for keeping the personalities out of it, and let's continue. I think we're making headway.
Just shut up, Kip.
Dorothy Peeler, Martinez, California. People that say they've been dancing mainstream for 25 years make it sound as if you're doing the same thing for 25 years. That list has changed, evolved over the last 25 years. And I heard next door they were trying to make a motion to break the 4-year rule, not to change for 4 years. This convention, in other words, people are champing at the bit to get the mainstream list open for change again. And I don't think it can be done before Wednesday. So what I'm thinking is it's a good thing we froze it for 4 years, because that's giving us time to think about what changes we want to make. And I really think that adding to it is part of the change we're going to have to make. So maybe we ought to discuss which moves should be added next year when we make changes in the mainstream.
Probably the place to do that precisely would be the mainstream committee meetings. And I encourage anybody who has inclinations in that area to participate in that meeting, especially if you've got some ideas for the changes. I think if we walk out of here thinking that change is not going to happen, you might be in for a surprise. Something is going to happen. And it might not be the idea that we just tossed on the floor here, but I think that mainstream is going to be unfrozen. At least next year in Reno it's going to be unfrozen automatically, and change is going to occur. So let's address that. Good idea, Dorothy.
Kenny Ferris, Laurel, Maryland.
Gee, Kenny.
You haven't seen me in a
How's
long
the
time,
family?
have you? I think this is a beautiful idea about let's take 2 calls. I know we're supposed to be talking about the 25-week program, but we're talking about the problem in general here. So could we do any resolutions come out of this meeting, or could they? Could we have resolutions coming out of this meeting? Could we make motions and...
Yes. Do you have something you'd like to propose?
Well, I'd like for you to maybe conduct a straw vote on maybe 4 calls and find out the 2 that would be the most well accepted plus calls to put on the mainstream program.
All right.
And we can do this year. You can add up to 3 calls and delete up to 3 calls on the mainstream program. Could we?
We could.
Address
please,
that. And
please understand, ladies and gentlemen, that I am not exercising any prerogatives in the mainstream area, and I'm not going to interfere with that committee operation.
But I mean, to get a
if we want to get a consensus in this group as to how we feel about those calls, I'm more than happy to help conduct that.
That'd be beautiful. Could we take?
You want to take?
Let's take track.
Take out a copy of your CALLERLAB experimental 25-session program.
Let's look at. Let me offer a suggestion of 4 to look at. And
Go ahead.
Can we take 4 to look at and then decide on 2 of them, perhaps? Track 2, coordinate, teacup chain, and I don't know. You give me another one.
How about extend the tag?
Extend the tag.
First of all, let me just say the coordinate is not on the experimental list that we've designed. That doesn't mean we can't discuss it, but I just want to point that out. Coordinate is not on this specific
Having
list.
said that,
Okay, having said that,
I'll let
then
you
we'll go.
conduct something.
We have to make a basic assumption now. Let's make the assumption that we're going to do a phase-in type of thing, and that'll be no more than 2 calls in any given year, if 2. Is that acceptable to everybody? I think we need a little bit more applause than that if we're going to pursue this any further.
Kip, Charlie Muff, Los Angeles. I think prior to that we should get a consensus of how many calls we would want to add over the 3 years. Would it be 6, 2 each year for 3 years, or just what?
The grand total. We have to back up and make some more assumptions, guys. What we're adding to has to be clearly defined. Are we talking about the mainstream bold-faced calls, just the bold-faced calls on the current experimental mainstream list? Is this what we're talking about, adding to that, or adding to the complete mainstream program? Let's have a show of hands for those who want to pursue the discussion in the area of adding to the mainstream bold-faced list. And those who want to pursue the discussion based on adding to the current existing mainstream list. All right, we're talking about the mainstream bold-faced list. Now, you all have a copy of that, too. So you should have that out. The next thing we have to do is to reconcile the differences between that list and this current experimental combined mainstream and plus list as far as mainstream bold-faced calls go. That reconciliation consists of 3 calls: cloverleaf, cross trail through, star promenade. In other words, the combined mainstream and plus list does not contain those calls, and those calls are bold-faced on the mainstream list.
But that's not on our list either.
You know what? Strangely enough, number 60 is missing on my list.
Deferred list.
Yeah. I guess I didn't make myself very clear. We're accepting the mainstream bold-faced calls. Dixie style is italicized. Okay? Dixie style is not contained on the combined mainstream plus list either. It's not there. It's not under consideration. That's what we're saying. It's not under consideration. So, if we're talking about the bold-faced mainstream calls, and we're talking about the combined 25-week mainstream plus list, the reconciliation between those lists consists of 3 calls. The mainstream bold-faced calls that are not on the combined list are cloverleaf, star promenade, and cross trail through. Now that we know what we're going to add to or subtract from, now we can talk about how many of those plus calls can be phased in over a 3-year period. All right? Bear in mind, though, that I think you'll also have to phase in cross trail through. No, they're already there. Okay, let's talk about the plus calls that we could phase in over a 3-year period. It's been proposed that we phase in track 2, coordinate, extend the tag, and there was one more. Teacup chain.
Yep, that was my proposal. I don't care about next year. We'll talk about next year. Let's just talk about the 2 calls this year, see how it goes. Next year we do it again.
Okay, all right. I understand what you're saying, Kenny, and please forgive me, folks, but I've been around these committee meetings long enough to know that when you don't agree in principle on what to do, it just gets totally out of hand. So let's agree that we know what we're talking about first, all right? And sometimes it takes me a long time. I go all the way around the block to get next door, and you guys are probably a lot quicker than I am, but I want to be talking about the bold-faced mainstream calls and adding the 4 plus calls. And first of all, I guess I'm saying, is that going to be the total that will be added? Just those 4? Or should we leave it open and say, let's not add anything at all? Or should we say we should only add 2 a year? How many feel that no more than 2 a year should be added, regardless of how many over an extended period of time are added? No more than 2. How many feel that we can afford to do 3? How many feel that 1 is adequate? All right, we're going down the track now of adding possibly 2 calls per year to that program. Red, do you want to speak to that? Or did you have another idea?
No, Red Bates, South Hadley, Massachusetts. I spent a year with this thing, as you all know, and getting a little sick of hearing about it, frankly. But anyway, I didn't come to the first session this morning. Maybe I missed something, I'm not sure. But anyway, the focus seems to be changing from what we intended this thing to, at least what I was given to do was to come up with a list based on what's being done throughout the country at plus-level dances. At plus-level dances, not mainstream. Nothing to do with mainstream, okay? And this was not in any way intended to affect the mainstream community whatsoever. But it was to provide an entry level into plus clubs. And we did exactly that through tapes, and we did frequency counts. Many hours went into it. And the calls that are not on the list are not being used. Okay, so if I took off cross trail through, it's because we didn't hear it. You know, maybe once in a blue moon somebody come up with a cross trail through in a singing call or something like that. But as far as being used regularly at a plus level dance, they're not being used. The 8 calls that we came up with were the popular plus calls, the ones that kept popping up everywhere. And it seems the ones that dancers can do. Coordinate was not one of those, by the way. So I feel that, at least I'm getting a message that the focus is being changed. Am I correct in that, or am I making a...
We're pursuing another line of thought, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're going down the avenue of trying to bring the plus and the mainstream communities back into some sort of alignment. Based on the information that you were able to compile in the past year, the frequency counts done at plus the frequency counts done at mainstream, we're now in a discovery mode. And we're saying, gee, they're only 3 calls apart.
Yeah, okay, then I see, I don't see that we're going to solve the problem between the plus and the mainstream. Now, maybe we don't want to do that, you know, but it's just going to add a few more calls to the mainstream list that went on and drop some off that are not being used. That's okay with me, because I like to get rid of the deadwood. If we're not using calls, I say get rid of them. You know, this has happened before with a lot of other calls that aren't being used either. But I'm having trouble seeing why this is going to be a solution to our problem, especially in the areas where we got predominantly plus clubs, and they want to bring their members into these clubs without having to, you know, spend another whole year to do it. I'm doing it with one club now. I've done it for 2 years, and we're a plus level club. But that's just what the vibes I'm getting, that's all.
Thank you, Red. Name, please.
Daryl McMillan from Florida. And I wanted to speak from down here instead of up there. And I want to throw something out for us to think about as you do basically what you're doing right here. I think your idea is good. And I feel like most of the people in the room would like to see us get a class situation together, one teaching program. And I've heard an awful lot of people say, and this is in various forms, like the national list situation that came up, and then I've heard some other people say we should do 25-week modules, and I've heard people say the plus should be bigger to keep people from going and all that. As you do what you started, I'd like to see us possibly consider just what you're doing and some way or another communicate with these people next door. If it means going over there in the next 10 minutes and tell them what we're thinking about, see if they want to, if it would be in line without interrupting their program, for them to discuss the same thing. And Now, last year we came up with this thing about the 25 weeks, and I think we anticipated at the convention that we would have this 25-week lesson to start teaching in September and teach for a year and then decide how it worked this year. Okay, it was a lot more work than we anticipated, and these two committees have worked tremendously hard to come up with what they did. So, but consequently, most of us haven't had time to use this 25-week program. But the point being, they have done their work now. They've worked nearly a year on it. And I don't think it would take very much longer to take our combined list and their italicized list and get them together. As you said, they're real close now. Okay, and my point being, when we leave here Wednesday, what I'd like to see us do is come up with what we said, a 25-week teaching program for everybody.
You bet.
And basically the same thing Kip said, which is the plus list to include everything that's not on that list, which is the italicized figures or something to that nature. Making the plus list a lot bigger. We would still have our plus groups. We would have a common teaching program for 25 weeks only. We would have something that we're close enough to now that it could be implemented by the end of the summer or before fall classes started, and something that we could implement in time and use before our convention next year when legally we can change the mainstream list, and it might be as simple as adopting what we have used for a year.
Anybody in favor of that? All those opposed, please pass a $20 bill to the center aisle.
Chris Veer again. Kip, you're saying that we're...
Say again, please.
Yes, there are, and I'm one of them.
I understand that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I apologize. I did not mean to diminish your argument at all. Excuse me.
You said that in order for us to make some kind of decision on these movements, we have to make an assumption first, and one of those assumptions is that we're only 3 movements apart. I don't know where we got this assumption that all of a sudden we're only 3 movements apart. It seems to me that there are a whole lot of things on that italicized list which, in my mind, are necessary portions of the trunk of our tree. It's a little bit of I have a little bit of a problem with us trying to chip little chunks out of the tree there. So I have the feeling somewhere that we may be making a false assumption. I would love to see us, as with Darrell say, come up with a 25-week list that everybody in CALLERLAB can agree upon, and I think that we have got totally away from Red's mandate, which was to come up with a program for people to get immediately into the plus lesson, and that's something that's happening in their area, and they've worked very hard to produce that program, and if it works there, that's fantastic and that's wonderful. But we're still overlooking the overall picture, and what's going to happen 15, 20, 30, 100 years down the road is square dancing still going to be square dancing. I don't have anything against change. We have to progress and we have to go forward. But I don't think chipping away at the tree trunk is going to get us very far forward.
I agree with what you're saying, Chris. I would like to comment, please. I agree with what you're saying about there are figures there that we don't want to chip away. But the only point I wanted to make is we just simply cannot grow that tree in a year. We need something we can do within 25 weeks, and we cannot get your tree that big in 25 weeks. And the only way to get it in 25 weeks is to leave some of the limbs off for now, for teaching. Did the analogy mess you up? You said by leaving the italicized calls off, you're leaving some things off that you would like to see left on or used. Okay, I'm not trying to get rid of those calls, but I think we have already agreed. You can't teach all of those calls, and what we're trying to do is get down to a smaller teaching time.
Yeah. That's a very good point. We cannot afford to lose sight of the fact that we have to bring people into the activity in a shorter period of time. I think what the mail is telling us throughout the year, people are saying that these two programs cannot coexist. They want to see one of them tossed out. Plus community is saying they really can't live with that mainstream, bold-faced, italicized list as it is. It doesn't help them in their areas. Mainstream community is saying, we don't like this experimental 25-week combined mainstream and plus. We got to like something, guys. We have to get together. There has to be something that we can start at. And if that means pruning that tree without tearing chunks out of the trunk, if we can prune it a little bit on all sides, we can come together. If we can't begin to prune, where are we going? Anybody have any comments?
Red Bates. I would like to reemphasize a point somebody made earlier that I heard, and I've heard it not in this session, but in Mike's session also yesterday. We have really not given this idea a fair shake. Our committee spent a year on preparing this thing. I think we should have another year to try it out, in all fairness to the program, and I don't see this is going to hurt anybody in the process, you know. If I thought it was going to hurt anybody, I wouldn't have been involved in it in the first place. But as I said, I've done it for 2 years now because I did it the year before in anticipation with a slight variation. And I know Kip has a similar program he uses, and there are other programs other guys have used similar to that because they, in their own defense, to get people ready for their own clubs, they had to do something. And I'm just saying, you know, don't shoot the horse before you give him a chance to walk, you know.
We haven't even taken a straw vote. Now's the time for us to do it. How many are in favor of continuing the experimental combined mainstream and plus program for another year? Well, let's. For what purpose? We're talking about the combined entry level to plus. Entry level to plus. All right, we just turned a fresh sheet of paper here. We're turning the page. We have not buried this program. That's what I think I'm getting at, Red. We haven't buried it. It's not dead. We're still discussing it. All right? The male is saying get rid of it. What's the sentiment in this room? How many say we should get rid of this program, that the experiment is over and done with? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Well, that was my next question, but some folks are against the existence of it, and I think that's what we're trying to sense here. Let me just ask one more time. How many are in favor of keeping this experiment going until it gets a fair shake, until we get a chance to analyze it? And we have a preponderance of callers in this room that feel that way. How many are opposed to it totally and want to see it shelved or done away with? Raise your hands, please. Thank you. Okay, as far as we're concerned, the experiment is still on. Okay? Don?
Don Henhurst again from Venice, Florida. My problem is not with Red's work, but with the term entry program. I really don't think we can have 2 entry programs. To enter anything, to enter the medical profession, you have to enter from the bottom and work your way up, or from a level of knowledge, a certain point of knowledge, and move up. You can't have 2 entry levels. You can't enter and become a brain surgeon before you begin to learn what medicine even does. So everybody has to start, and this cannot ever be an entry level unless we expect to change the entry level every 3 years like we change our socks. The problem as we see it now is, at least as far as I say, is that we cannot teach dancers in 25 weeks, 40 weeks, I don't care how many weeks. I like 25, a nice term. But we can't teach them to dance with our clubs because our clubs are plus level. Okay, 4 years from now, those same experienced, seasoned dancers will not want to dance at the entry level. They'll want to dance chain reaction, motivate, split counter rotate. Yes, they will. The same as the ones that, they will. The same as the dancers before that didn't want to dance teacup chain, now dance it because the caller... In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the entry level has to be defined and stay there. Anything above that is super. There's nothing wrong with it. But if we make this an entry level, then we have 2 entry levels. If we do away with the mainstream entry level, which has been one for the last 12 years, then we've disenfranchised a whole lot of dancers who have been dancing for 12 years. I have no quarrel with advanced dancing. I have no quarrel with levels. My only quarrel is do not call us an entry level. It is not entry into square dancing. It is entry into plus. That would be fine, but then we've developed a whole new program.
I think that's a real good, careful analysis of what we're facing. That's the problem. That is the problem. You see, if we don't have an entry level, if you will, or an entry program that's designed to bring people into our clubs, then what are they entering anyway? They've got to enter our clubs. Some of our clubs are mainstream, very, very strongly so around the world. Some of our clubs are plus. Soft, albeit, but they're plus. Now, if we don't have two programs to serve those two separate needs, then we have to have a single program that somehow will accommodate both. And I agree with you, Don, 100%. I don't think the two programs can coexist. I think it'll tear the fabric of this organization to shreds.
Jim Hale, Houston, Texas. Somebody turned off? I have no problem with a modification of the program, but I think we have looked at the problem. We haven't really discussed anything about the cause of the problem. We had a good mainstream and a good plus program, and it apparently has worked in a number of areas. Other areas it did not work in, not because of the program, but because of the way we as callers implement it. And I happen to come from one of the areas where it doesn't work in now. I should be all for anything that'll get this people into this plus area, because that's what the dancers want to dance down there. But they want to dance there simply because we have suggested in our actions and in our teaching and in our organization of plus classes that plus is a place you want to be. That's it. Whatever program we come up with here, if we implement it the same way it was implemented before, it's going to have the same disastrous results that the plus program has had so far in our dancing. And I cannot conceive, since I personally have trouble with teaching the mainstream as it now stands in 30 weeks. And now I hear that we're going to have an experimental program in which we're going to teach the necessary mainstream and leave a few off, and we're going to add some plus to it. This has not solved the problem of getting the people into the plus level, because we're simply saying, now you're going to teach more in a smaller time yet. And when this happens, you're going to wind up running more and more dancers away. We set a time limit of 41 weeks on mainstream. I find that my dancers learn, the fast learners are generally the younger people. The slower younger learners are generally the older people. So if I took an average here, I've lost half my dancers that are not fast enough to keep up with it now. Now, among the faster learners then, among the lower age group of people, which should be the faster learners, you have a variance in learning abilities there. What we've done is is poured so much on these people, trying to get them to the plus, that we run off 75% of them before they ever learn to square dance. And this is the real problem we're looking at right here. So if we're talking about adding something to a plus list, or to a mainstream list, to make an entry into plus out of it, we better darn sure talk about cutting a whole bunch out of it, or we're going to run the same dancers away.
Thank you.
Earl Johnston from Connecticut. Jim just made a good point, and I just come up to, but I'm not sure it's the issue, Kip. It seems to me that when square dancing started to drop in popularity, or the golden years of the mass groups of people taking, was when the lesson program got over 15 to 16 weeks. When we got to 18, before there were levels, before there were lists, we had accomplished so much that we had to go to 18 weeks. Then we went to 20. Then we went to 24. That's when the classes started to get smaller. So I think what he said is a very valid point. And then the other thing is, all of this is based upon a premise that every caller who gets these lists is a good caller. And I think that's one of our weaknesses. A lot of fellows can't, whether they don't have the time or the talent, it's a very aggressive program for a fellow who has to work 8 hours a day and has a family, and he's trying to exist. Then he is supposed to be proficient in whatever list we give him, and that's not true. That's not true. Now, it doesn't apply to anyone in this room. I mean, we're all, but it's those guys out there who can't handle it. And I just think we have to be realistic. And I think part of our problem is we're basing this upon the fact that everybody can do it. And I know there's lots of guys that can't. They can only, whether they don't have time or talent, I don't know. But I think his point of too many lessons, he says we're still too heavy, too many weeks for entry level. And he's probably right. He's probably very, very right. I don't know if we'll do anything about it. But I just want to back up what he said. And I don't know. Jim, where are you?
Thank you, Earl. One law from Lansing, Michigan area again is, if any of them weren't in here before, we did use this program, and it is so far is working pretty well. But I think back when I started, I took 6 lessons. The callers themselves have killed this thing. We should not have 4,500 calls in Burleson's thing. We should have 100. That's all we intend on using. And in our Lansing area, we've got about 20 to 30 clubs. We voted in our association 3 years ago that we're going to teach just mainstream, and they got a dance set for a year. Didn't work. This guy taught 4 couples. I taught 10. Somebody else taught 7. What you going to do with them? Our clubs are dancing plus. I mean all the way through plus. Unless we could all put them all together so that we had a club. Now, like I've heard them out in California say, well, we teach 30 squares. I don't think they're doing that now either. But that would be beautiful. You could keep them dancing mainstream for a couple of years. They wouldn't know the difference. But our people who help us, our angels, are plus dancers. And I just say that we've got to give them a little bit of plus so we can bring them into a club and then work on from there. That's the way I feel. Thank you. And we really have, with an hour and 5 minutes left, we've got to get back on track just a little bit here and address how this experimental list is aiding us in bringing the newer dancers into our plus clubs right now.
I have a question. Dorothy Peeler, Martinez, California. We are CALLERLAB. We are. It's not they. And are you saying that we, CALLERLAB, cannot endorse 2 levels of entry into the square dance world? That there can't be a mainstream entry and a plus entry? Is that what you're saying we should?
No, that's not what I said. I was
Okay.
Dorothy, I was expressing a personal opinion that I didn't think they could coexist if in fact CALLERLAB did endorse that. That's a personal opinion.
Yeah, Gary Shoemake from Tennessee. I'm not sure, and I really don't know how to start this. I think you're going to have to give Red's program a chance. I think you'll all agree that most of it's been stated already before, and as Earl said, back when we had fewer lessons, we had the golden years. Not so far long ago, about 1976, about 10 years or so ago, we were booming with dancers. We had the largest convention ever in our history. Our classes were great. We had everything going, and that was a time period before these level systems that we have. I don't really think the issue is so much what type of calls it is at the bottom end. I think we have to find that we're going to have to get back to one list, no matter what you as your callers and CALLERLAB decides what that list, what calls are going to be on that list, whether it include a few plus or whether it does not include a few plus, or if it's popular enough that it might include some advanced. I don't know, but I think that realistically, if we're looking at the future of square dancing, that we are going to have to find an entry level that we can bring the dancers into square dancing and not make them feel as second-class citizens to their friends who recruited them and brought them into the activity. And I think that if we don't give Red's program a chance to see what it will do, whether we end up using it or whether we go back to our mainstream program that as it exists right now, but in some way, form, or fashion get back to one level at the entry level of square dancing. I don't really care, like I said, and I don't think many of you do, what calls are on that list. I think we're all smart enough or gentlemen enough to agree that whatever list comes about is not going to, each one of us is not going to be 100% in agreement with, but it's not going to be, as we found with all the lists that we have now, something that we can't live with. So if we could have the time to give Red's list or his program a chance, then maybe it will give us some insight into coming into a program that will give us one level of square dancing at the bottom end, so that if we have to combine part of plus with part of mainstream, or if we have to raise mainstream a little bit to meet that criteria, whatever we have to do to bring the bottom end of square dancing together as one level, I think that would be the thing that would increase our participation and give us better recruiting. And I think, as a man said with another view, that's what we're looking at is people right now. We are desperately in need of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Roy?
Yeah, Roy Gotta from New Jersey. I've been kind of sitting back trying to get a feel for just what everybody is trying to do here in kind of a general consensus, and have been totally unsuccessful in getting a general feel for the whole thing. But a couple observations. As far as the mainstream clubs are concerned, as near as I can figure, they don't have a real big problem as far as an entry level into the mainstream clubs. If they're dancing mainstream in their given areas, they can get their dancers into the clubs and dance them. There appears to be a major problem in entry level into the plus areas. In other words, you have an area that's predominantly plus, and you cannot teach them plus as it exists in the given number of weeks, and the dancers have no place to go. And the development of this 25-week program is to try and alleviate some of that problem, possibly unite the dancers overall. But I see a problem, and I agree that Red's program should be given some time to work. I personally don't know whether it'll work or not. I have mixed emotions, and I have changed my mind about 6 times sitting here listening to this meeting. Okay? But I think we need to give it a chance. But I think you have a problem in what it's called, the Combined Mainstream Plus program. You're alienating people in favor of mainstream, and you're possibly alienating people in favor of plus. And I think you really should consider not calling it a Combined Mainstream Plus program. I think that's part of the problem, because mainstream dancers all over the country are saying, leave us alone. And that's just a personal observation.
Okay, thank you, Roy. How many callers in the room have actually used this program? We asked that in the first session. We only had 3 or 4 hands up, and now we've got 7 hands up. We sure would like to hear from you folks that have used the program a little bit before the session is out. But for those of you who are truly involved in the program, it hasn't been kissed off at all. Believe me, it's still viable, it's still working. And I want to point out to you that at 1:30 this afternoon, Red will chair the special Combined Mainstream Plus Committee at Poydras B, room Poydras B. And if we don't get to suggestions for changes and additions and deletions and possible ramifications in this room, then perhaps we can go down there at 1:30 and we'll pick it up again from there. But we have done an awful lot in this room in the past hour, and in the past few hours, and we're going to continue that, because we are doing a lot of air cleaning here. There's been some misunderstanding, and I think maybe we have cleared the air. If you think that the problem is simple, it's not. If you're confused by the issue, welcome to the club. It is just not a simple problem. Yes.
I'm Bill McVeigh from Georgia. Seems to me that what Gary said, Gary Shoemake, makes sense. If you take the bold-faced basics list and you teach this as an entry level, leave off the italicized part. Now, if you're going to go into a mainstream club, which you have predominantly mainstream people, go back and pick up the italicized basics and teach them, and these people will be mainstream dancers as you have the list defined now. All right, if you have basically a plus club, go ahead and teach the plus movements and the italicized basics, and you have practically the same level you have now. In other words, the caller himself could determine his direction he's going to go when he begins his classes, and he can teach a 25-week class using the bold-faced movements and then decide which way he's going to go depending on what his clubs are dancing. So you have the tools there to go in the direction you want to go depending on what your club is doing. But I agree on one thing, and that is that I think there is a stigma among square dancers about the plus level. Now, all my clubs are plus. the lessons and getting them into the club without losing them. But the reason, the main reason that we have that problem is that the plus dancers leave the impression with beginning dancers that you're nothing unless you dance plus. And I don't know how you stop that. But I do believe that if you took the bold-faced basics, and I've been teaching square dancing for 28 years, teach the bold-faced movements, and then decide, now I've got a mainstream club here, we're going to stay mainstream, so I'm going to go back and pick up the italicized, the left swing throughs, the Dixie, whatever else is on the list, and that's it. All right, if you have Red's program, it basically is what he's doing there, and then you're going to go into a plus group, you pick up the plus movements, and also the italicized movements. And you're doing exactly what all of us are trying to do, is get classes down to 25 weeks. And you can teach a 25-week course with the bold-faced movements, regardless of whether you're going to go into plus or whether you're going to stay at mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kip, Ken Ritusi from West Springfield, Mass. Daryl asked in the beginning of the program how many had completed it, so I didn't bother to get up and discuss it. I'm currently using the program. Unfortunately, there's two drawbacks to what I'm doing with this program. One, I'm the only one in the area using it. And two, since my dancers haven't even graduated with the program, I haven't been able to send them out anywhere to dance. I personally can live without all those italicized calls. Teaching this program has just been great. I'd like to see next year in Reno, when that mainstream program becomes unfrozen, something should be done. I think we can live with this list. I think people haven't even given it enough chance in the country. I'd like to see in the next year more callers use it so we have more feedback. I certainly hope we don't kill it here, and I think Red's committee has done a lot of work. It's just not fair to kill it this soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
John Marshall, Reston, Virginia. I'm going to kind of take a whole turnaround and jump in from a whole other angle, Kip, in terms of how did we arrive here. And I really am going to address those of us who are in areas that have, for all intent and purposes, little to no mainstream at all. Our clubs are all plus. And we're wrestling with a human nature problem. And we're the problem, those of us that have had that kind of an area, because CALLERLAB, a long time ago, defined plus. They said, this is plus. They didn't define soft plus. They didn't define popular plus. They defined plus. Here it is. And they had mainstream over here. And they said, here that is. Right? But we went in and said, no, that's great. I'm part of CALLERLAB, and I believe what CALLERLAB says, but I know what's best in my groups. And I don't like this call, and I don't like that call, and I don't like the other call. But everybody says, well, what club are your clubs? We're plus. Who's plus? They're not CALLERLAB's plus. They're the plus that they determined. The CALLERLAB plus that was established to begin with, if the callers maintained integrity and if we had a way to hold the callers accountable, if the dancers even would hold the callers accountable, would work just fine. Because there's a lot of meat in the full plus program, right? But we can't legislate that. We can't legislate the accountability. There's a lot of callers floating through that say, give me a list. I don't care what's on it. Just give me a list, and I'll stay with just that list, and I'll be happy. And that's what a lot of the mainstream callers, I think, are saying. The ones from the areas that we're hearing from that are pure mainstream, if you will, right? They say, that's the list. I learned to use that list, and that's the list I use, and I don't deviate. So they don't want to be messed with. But when we started getting involved in the plus, we kept creating aberrations. We can't legislate the accountability of the caller. That's one of our biggest problems. I think CALLERLAB, preceding CALLERLABs, have done a super job of designing something that will work well for us if we would stick with it and follow it and believe in it. But we're all individuals, and none of us are willing necessarily to be guided all the way. We always hear, well, that's a guideline. That's not a hard and fast rule, right? And my feeling all along has been, okay, it's a guideline. I didn't tell you have to use everything, every single tip, but use it all. You know, and there would be a lot there. But instead, what we've done is we've bled. The mainstream callers, or mainstream groups have bled down a few calls and a few more calls, and the easier ones, one way only, one position only. And that's how we've arrived here, I think. And I really admit, and it's not going to be a major help, I don't think there's any way for us to legislate the caller or legislate the accountability of the callers. But we're still wrestling round and round and round trying to come up with a list or a program that's going to solve all that. I think whatever you put on any list, we're still going to have a degree of that kind of a problem, of the caller still running off doing what he wants to do. And I'd like to think that most especially it's the callers that don't choose to belong to Caller Lab that are going to do that. I'd like to think that that's where the biggest part of the problem lies. And I don't know where we can go with it, but I think that's how we arrived here, and I'd like to see us at least give some thought to taking whether it be Red's program, which does need a chance to be tried, and using it in its entirety. Don't break it up into little bits, you know. Don't modify it. Give it a chance as it stands and see how you feel about it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Of those of you who are using this program, have you found that it has been successful as far as bringing new people into your own personal club environment? If you have, raise your hand, please. Yeah, we had three. That went up to 7. We had 7 who tried it, and how many of the 7 have found it to be successful as far as bringing the people into their club? It's hard to say because they're not finished. They're not finished with it yet. All right? So if you're wondering how come the session here seems to be going back and forth a little bit, it's very difficult to get feedback and analysis from an experiment where the water's still boiling. It's tough to say. My class graduates when I get home next week. And I happen to know that they're already dancing with the club because that's one of the things that I do to make this whole thing work. I bring my club in about 2 months or 6 weeks ahead of time. But I know that it works. I can positively say that the thing works. For me, it works really well. And I know that's what we were sort of here to do. Jerry?
Jerry Haig, Wyoming, Texas, wherever. The reason that I went from in looking over both of the programs, and I decided to settle in on the 25-week program as the one I would experiment with this season, and it has worked out to my satisfaction. And I kept in mind that the bold-faced and italicized program doesn't really address the problem that we have. The problem that we have is too long a teaching time. 41 weeks is too long. We keep looking at that, and we keep thinking if we use the bold-faced italicized program, then we're not getting rid of the problem. The problem is we want people to come into the square dance activity in the minimum amount of time and still be able to phase them into the clubs. Well, the 25-week program is the closest thing that I've seen that does that. And I don't think that we can continue to add more things onto it later. I think we're going to have to get to a 25-week program. That's going to have to be it. We're going to have to whittle it down and live with it. Anybody can take them. My gosh, I've come from Birdie in the Cage to where we are now, and I've added the other direction. I can sure back up and go back the other way. It is not going to hurt my program at all.
We're coming up to the lunch hour. I'd like to be able to wrap this up with 7 resolutions that's going to solve all the problems. We can't do it. Please remember that Red has a meeting at 1:30 to continue discussions on the exact program, and also keep this in mind, too. We're out after the same thing, bringing people into our clubs. The problem we have is our clubs are different. That's 2 standards. You have 2 programs. How are you going to run interstate festivals? How are you going to run national conventions? The only reason we have standards is for dancer mobility, so dancers can travel around. If we have 2 standards,